Over on Purple Insider, a new Vikings history video is out about the time that Bud Grant, during a game against the Detroit Lions, only showed up to the game 5 minutes before kickoff. Click the card in the upper right corner to watch. And now, on with our feature presentation. When a player gets moved down the depth chart before the start of the season, so not counting the end of the season when a team might be out of the hunt and they want to test out the youngsters, there might be a few reasons for that. However, usually, it boils down to one of two things. Either the player they're competing with is playing better than you are, or you're playing significantly worse. It's not a surprise when a highly touted rookie overtakes someone on the depth chart because they look like the better player and give the team a better chance of winning. Likewise, it's not a surprise if you get moved down the depth chart because you're having a poor training camp, or you violate team rules, or you show up to camp late or out of shape and wind up in the doghouse. Most of the time, with depth chart moves, there's nothing too surprising about a player jumping up or falling down, and the coach, being the one that sets the depth chart, is okay and fully accepting of the move, even advocating for it. And then, there's the absolutely bizarre case of this player right here. This is St. Louis Cardinals fullback Wayne Morris. And during some dark times for the Cardinals around the turn of the decade from the 1970s to the 1980s, he was a bright spot, playing consistently good football. However, to start off the 1981 season, despite his great play, he was not listed as the starting fullback. Rather, he was listed as the backup. And the reason why? It didn't have to do with him playing poorly in camp, or getting into any sort of feud in camp with anyone, or anyone overtaking him on the depth chart by virtue of standing out to the point where it would be impossible not to play him. In fact, not even the head coach himself knew why Morris wasn't starting. It's a strange situation that deserves a deep dive, because this is the story behind one of the strangest depth chart moves in the history of the Cardinals organization. Before I talk about the actual move in question, and what was so puzzling about it, in particular, the explanation given for it, we need some context to understand just how good Wayne Morris was, and who was behind him on the depth chart. The year is 1980, and Jim Hanifan, who you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner, is the new head coach of the St. Louis Cardinals. When a new head coach comes in that has no ties and no affiliation whatsoever to any of the players, sometimes they can sour on the players from the previous regime. And sometimes they take an instant liking to them and say to themselves, this guy is going to be an important part of this team because I love his attitude, I love his toughness, and I love the way he plays. And that's exactly the way that Hanifan felt about the man that you've been watching this whole time, Wayne Morris, as he was a true dual-threat fullback. You needed him to block? You bet he could do that. There's no way that Otis Anderson doesn't win Offensive Rookie of the Year in 1979 and finish the year with over 1,600 rushing yards if it wasn't for Morris blocking for him and being the lead blocker. You needed him to run the ball and get yards that way? You bet he could do that. During the 1977 season, he had 8 rushing touchdowns in 14 games, which ranked 4th in the NFL. Over his first 5 seasons in the league, the man had 31 touchdowns and just under 3,400 yards from scrimmage, all while averaging around 4 yards per carry and never going down easily. Ask the Minnesota Vikings just how good he was as a runner, particularly in a 1977 game where the Cardinals won 27-7, and Morris had 182 rushing yards on over 6.7 yards per carry and over 200 yards from scrimmage. Ask the New Orleans Saints just how good he was as a runner down by the goal line. He had a 1980 game against them where he had 3 rushing touchdowns in a 40-7 victory, and he had a 1977 game against them where he had 4 rushing touchdowns in a 49-31 victory. Wayne Morris wasn't the flashiest guy on the team, or the guy making highlights, or the guy that most people around the NFL knew. If you knew of the Cardinals and their offense, it was likely guys like quarterback Jim Hart, wide receiver Mel Gray, or the aforementioned Otis Anderson. But make no mistake about it, Wayne Morris was just as important. And safe to say, head coach Jim Hanifan loved the guy. He couldn't speak highly enough of him, and every word that came out of his mouth was praiseworthy toward the guy. Said Hanifan on Morris during that 1980 season, "I've known Wayne since he came into the league, and intensity is his middle name. He's a fine blocker, and the kind of guy who always gives you 150%. He's just so tough. In darn near every running play, he's got a key block at the point of attack. There are so many situations where you can see on the films that Otis Anderson made the game because of a block from Wayne. We think he's a darn fine ball carrier too. Wayne is definitely our number one fullback. He's fundamentally sound. I would say that is an accurate description of Wayne. He rarely makes a mistake. And even though there was another youngster competing for a starting job, with that player being Theotis Brown, the second-round pick that the Cardinals made in 1979 out of UCLA before Hanifan got there, Hanifan had no desire to play the man. Not because he had anything against him. In fact, he called him a fine football player. Rather, it was just the idea that Wayne Morris was playing incredibly well, and Brown hadn't done enough to earn the starting spot. Said Hanifan, "I have nothing against Theotis as a person or a player. He's really got the entire package. Eventually, I think he'll wind up being a great back. He's been competing, and he wants it, but he's faced with a young man who also is a competitor and who also wants it. And Wayne Morris doesn't make mistakes." Case in point about the mistakes thing. In 1980, despite having 117 carries, he didn't fumble once, compared to Brown, who had 40 carries and fumbled twice. In fact, Morris had the second most carries of any player in the NFL in 1980 to not fumble the ball, as the only one who had more was San Diego Chargers running back Mike Thomas, who had just one carry more at 118. So you would think that entering the 1981 season, that this man right here, Wayne Morris, would be the starter, right? He was still in the prime of his career, in his mid-20s. He wasn't costing the team any sort of money to the point where he would be a financial burden to keep him around. And he was loved by his teammates and by his head coach. And even though Theotis Brown seemed like a quality backup on paper, especially in the ground game, where he had 8 touchdowns the previous 2 seasons on 4.5 yards per carry, he wasn't the complete player just yet, particularly as a blocker, that Morris was, and gave the team a worse chance to win if he was playing over Morris. However, after one day of training camp, Hanifan made the switch. The third-year player, Theotis Brown, would be getting the starting spot over the man in his prime of his career who the coach adored, Wayne Morris. It showed the insane talent that the Cardinals had on paper in their backfield, because most teams would kill to have either Brown or Morris as their starting fullback, and the Cards had to choose between the two. However, Hanifan decided to go with Brown. Which raises the question, why did Wayne Morris lose his starting spot to Theotis Brown? Well, based on what I said at the start, and based on what you know about depth chart changes, you would figure that it boiled down to one of two things. Either the player who was the backup made such an improvement and was playing so much better that he deserved the job, or the starter was noticeably worse that he didn't deserve the job. However, when it came to the benching of Wayne Morris, neither of that happened. In fact, oddly enough, despite the fact that Jim Hanifan is ultimately the man who sets the depth chart and decides who plays, he was visibly distraught over benching Wayne Morris. Hanifan flat out said that Brown had not beaten out Morris for the starting spot. Morris was playing just as well, if not better. Hanifan even said that the decision to bench Morris for Brown, even though Morris was the better player and was having a better camp, went against the grain of everything I stand for as a coach. Hanifan said when he spoke to Morris about this, "I told him, Wayne, I love you like a son, and I hope my son grows up to be like you. but I told him we had to give Theotis a chance. It's his 3rd year, and if he's ever going to do it, it's now. So let me get this straight. Instead of just splitting carries to see if Brown could do it, Hanifan just outright benched Morris in favor of Brown because Morris, by his own admission, was the better player? I mean, when another player like Theotis Brown wins the starting job, most coaches say something like, "We're excited to see what he can do," or "He deserves it and improved a ton this offseason," or "He adds a new dimension to the offense that we didn't really have before," or "He's played really well and deserves an expanded opportunity and an expanded role in this team." They don't do what Hanifan did and say, "Starting this guy over the incumbent really hurts me because I flat out love the incumbent and he's the better player. The incumbent actually gives us a better chance to win and was playing better and did nothing to lose the job." In fact, benching the incumbent goes against everything I believe in. This either was a coach who was completely out of his element and had no idea what he was doing, or it had to reek of ownership interference. But I might rule that out, considering the fact that Bing Devine, the team vice president for administration, said on Morris, "I've never heard him say a bad word about anybody, or anybody say a bad word about him." This looked like a case of Hanifan telling Morris, "I love you, and you're a great player, and you're actually significantly better than the other guy, but we're benching you. Sorry." And Morris took the news surprisingly well. Seriously, you can see why people love Wayne Morris. As Morris said upon hearing the news, when you have a guy like my friend Theotis, who just has exceptional ability, God-given ability, it's only natural that he gets a chance. He's got God-gifted hands, the size of a catcher, like Johnny Bench. He's got speed and size and hands. My father always said one of the biggest assets I had was diplomacy. I want to be a part of one big happy family, a family together, rather than always stirring something up. He then added, "I'll have to be an exceptional special teams player and backup. I'm not looking for Theotis to give the job up. I'm going to help the team wherever I can, and I'm going to push Theotis as much as possible to make him a better starter. I never considered asking for a trade. I'm not that type of player. I want to stay with the Cardinals until I retire. If I work for a company for 10 years, I wouldn't want to change jobs either. My goal this year is to win. Whether I'm a starter or a backup, going to the playoffs is my goal." I can just imagine the happy faces on the people of St. Louis and all that jubilation. I'd really like to be around that. I mean, holy cow, this guy truly is the consummate professional, especially considering that he lost his starting job for, quite literally, no reason at all. Hanifan told him and the public that Brown was worse than he was, that he played flawless football, that he was a great player, and that even despite all of that, he was getting benched, and Morris took the news insanely well, essentially saying, "It's okay. I understand." Even though Hanifan himself didn't quite understand why he was doing what he was doing. Which is why it probably won't come as a surprise that after just 1 month, Brown, following a 2-fumble game against the New York Giants in a 34-14 loss, and following a string of poor blocking performances, was traded to the Seattle Seahawks. And the man that you've been watching this whole time, Wayne Morris, got the starting job back. And if anything, it seemed like a sigh of relief that Brown was no longer there, seeing as it meant that Morris could play more, because Hanifan knew that he made a huge mistake. Said Hanifan after the trade was made, "Wayne Morris didn't play bad football when he was in there. Come to think of it, I don't think he's ever played a bad football game in his life." Again, that raises the obvious question of why you benched him in the first place. But at least the nightmare was over with, and Morris played with the Cardinals all the way until 1983, having a nice 8-year career with the team before ending it as a member of the San Diego Chargers in 1984. But if ever there was a case of a player not earning his demotion, it was Wayne Morris at the start of the 1981 season, seeing as the coach flat out said he didn't deserve to get demoted. Deciding who should start should be a meritocracy. It's one of the beauties of the NFL that if you're good enough to play and start, you're going to play and start. And this decision by Jim Hanifan truly made no sense at all, especially since it wasn't the end of the season, so it's not like you can say he was giving the younger player a chance in a meaningless game. He wasn't tied to Brown, didn't draft Brown, there was no financial burden, he wasn't pressured by ownership to do this, there was no significant age difference between the two players, and he admitted fully to Morris and the public that this went against everything he believed in, and that Morris, in actuality, was the better player. Because the 1981 decision by Jim Hanifan to start Theotis Brown over Wayne Morris has to be, considering the circumstances, the strangest and the weirdest benching in Cardinals franchise history. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.